a place where the earth itself remembers a crime, a place not haunted by a person, but by a sound. The year is 1864, the final, brutal days of the Civil War. In the dense woods of Missouri, a group of quarry workers, men who spent their lives carving stone from the earth, mysteriously vanished. No bodies were ever found, no trace of a struggle, just their tools left behind and a profound, unsettling silence. Locals whispered of a deep, dark secret buried beneath the very stone they were meant to excavate. They said the quarry was cursed, that the stone was alive. And to this day, when the conditions are just right, some claim you can still hear them, the faint echoes of their final moments, trapped forever beneath a mountain of rock. This is the story of Deadman's Quarry, and the chilling truth that lies beneath the stone. If you're as fascinated by stories that blur the line between history and legend as I am, you've come to the right place. Go ahead and hit that like button, it helps us bring more incredible tales like this to life. And while you're at it, subscribe and ring that notification bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into the unexplained. Sharing this video with a friend who loves a good mystery, that's always appreciated. The year is 1864. The Civil War has been grinding on for 3 long, bloody years. But in Missouri, the war wasn't fought on distant battlefields or in grand strategic maneuvers. It was a vicious, personal conflict fought on the front porch and in the backwoods. Neighbor against neighbor, brother against brother. A war of guerrilla raids, ambushes, and scores settled with a bullet instead of a formal surrender. It was a place of immense tension, where a wrong word could get you killed, and trust was a luxury few could afford. In the middle of all this chaos, there was a small community of men living a life apart from the war's violence. Their battlefield was a massive, gaping hole in the earth, a place of hard labor and sweat, the Deadman's Quarry. The name itself, even before the legend, was a grim nod to the inherent danger of the work. It was a name given by the old-timers, a warning to anyone who tried to stand against the sheer force of nature. The men who worked there were a mix of ages and backgrounds, but they shared one thing. They were trying to survive. They weren't fighting for the North or the South. They were fighting for a paycheck, for a meal on the table, for a life that felt normal in an increasingly abnormal world. But they were about to discover that even a mountain of solid stone could not protect them from the brutal reality of their time. The Deadman's Quarry was a scar on the land, a massive gaping wound carved into the side of a hill. Its walls were sheer faces of gray rock, rising hundreds of feet, trapping the sound of labor within its cold stone embrace. The air was thick with the dust of 1,000 explosions and the scent of gunpowder, a constant reminder of the brutal force required to break the earth. The rhythm of the work was a brutal symphony, the sharp clang of a pickaxe hitting rock, the metallic ring of a chisel against a hammer, and the deep, rumbling boom of dynamite blasts echoing off the stone walls. The men who worked there lived by the rhythm of the quarry, their muscles aching from the constant effort of carving out the stone. They were specialists in a dangerous art, using black powder and brute force to break apart the rock face, freeing massive slabs of limestone and granite. It was dangerous work, full of the constant risk of falling rock and unstable ledges. But the men were accustomed to the danger. They respected the stone, understanding its power and its unyielding nature. They believed they knew this place, that they had tamed it with their tools and their sweat. They saw the quarry as a silent, inanimate thing, a mere source of income. But as we'll soon learn, the earth has a memory, and sometimes, the sounds of its past are not so easily forgotten. The very rock they carved from the earth was about to become the tomb for the sounds of their own lives. On that day, like any other, the men of the quarry followed their routine. As the afternoon sun began to dip behind the jagged rock face, casting long shadows across the chasm, they began to pack up their gear. The clang of a hammer against a chisel faded, replaced by the soft shuffle of boots on loose rock. There was a sense of tired satisfaction in the air, the kind that comes from a day of honest, grueling work. They spoke of the supper waiting for them at home, of a warm fire and a quiet night. The foreman, a weathered man named Jedediah, who had been working the quarry since before the war, called out a final order. They left their tools neatly stacked against the quarry wall, pickaxes, shovels, and coiled rope. There was no reason not to. They'd be back in the morning before dawn, ready to carve more rock from the earth. The youngest of the crew, a boy barely old enough to grow a beard, was the last to walk away, whistling a tune as he headed toward the tree line. And then, the quarry was silent. The sun finished its descent, and the last light of day disappeared into the chasm. The silence wasn't just a lack of sound, it was a deep, palpable quiet, a silence that held a secret, because the next morning, when the sun rose, no one came back to retrieve the tools. The quarry stood empty, save for the silent stone, and a profound, terrifying absence. What could possibly have happened between the last step of the last man and the first light of the next day? The next morning, the sun rose on the same quiet quarry, but something was profoundly different. The rhythm of the placed clang of steel, the rumbling blasts, the distant shouts was gone. The first person to notice was a young woman named Sarah, who had walked to the quarry to bring her husband, John, his lunch. She arrived to an eerie and total silence. Her cheerful call of John was met only with the mocking echo of the stone walls. She walked deeper into the chasm, her footsteps the only sound, and her heart began to pound with a frantic, illogical fear. There, against the gray rock, were the tools, neatly stacked, just as they would be after a day's work. It was as if the men had simply set them down and walked away, expecting to be back in moments. But the quarry was empty, not a soul. It was a perfect, unsettling scene. The tools of their trade, the evidence of their labor, were all present. But the laborers themselves were gone without a trace. She ran back to town, her mind a frantic mess of questions, her fears escalating with every step. When she finally reached the small collection of homes, her story was met with a mix of disbelief and growing dread. Surely, the men were just a little late. They had probably taken a different path home, or had simply decided to start late. But as the hours passed and no one returned, the community knew, with a bone-deep certainty, that something terrible had happened. The alarm spread quickly. Soon, a small search party, armed with rifles and a growing sense of dread, made their way to the quarry. They moved with the silent, cautious precision of men accustomed to the dangers of their land and their time, but no amount of experience could have prepared them for what they found. The quarry was exactly as Sarah had described, a monument to a normal day's work, frozen in time. They meticulously scoured the entire area. They checked the rock faces for any sign of a rock slide. They walked the perimeter of the quarry, searching the woods for footprints or a sign of a struggle. They looked down into the deep, dark chasms of the quarry itself, thinking perhaps a man had slipped and fallen. But there was nothing. No blood, no scuff marks on the rock, no torn clothing snagged on a bush. The ground was undisturbed, save for their own prints and those of the missing men, which led right up to their tools, and then, simply ended. The tools themselves were a chilling detail. The pickaxes and hammers lay where they were left. A half-eaten lunch pail sat on a ledge, untouched. There was no sign of a robbery, no evidence of a fight, nothing to suggest the men had left under duress. They hadn't run, they hadn't fallen, and they hadn't been ambushed. They had simply ceased to be. The search continued for days, expanding far beyond the quarry and into the dense Missouri woods. Every ravine was checked, every cave explored. But the result was always the same. Nothing. As the sun set on the third day of the search, the townspeople were forced to accept an impossible truth. The men hadn't been killed in a skirmish. Their bodies hadn't been hidden. They had simply vanished from the face of the earth. The community, already hardened by war, was now gripped by a new kind of fear, one that had no name and no face. The quarry was officially abandoned. The half-finished rock face and the tools left behind became a frozen, eerie monument to the event. People stopped referring to it simply as the quarry and began calling it what it had become, Deadman's Quarry. The name, once a morbid joke about the danger of the work, was now a chilling reality. The very stone they had been trying to break became a silent tomb, holding a secret no one could solve. But a profound mystery like this doesn't stay silent for long. The human mind abhors a vacuum of information. Was it a freak natural event, an incredibly clean, efficient ambush, or something more sinister? The questions hung in the air, but the answers, everyone agreed, were buried somewhere deep beneath the stone. The quarry may have been silent, but the whispers were just beginning. The fear that gripped the community of Deadman's Quarry was a quiet, insidious thing. It wasn't the kind of fear that sends you running. It was the kind that settles in your bones and makes you question everything you thought you knew about the world. No one went near the quarry. The dirt road leading to it became a forgotten path, overgrown with weeds and brambles. But even from a distance, the place seemed to exert a chilling influence, a cold weight on the back of the mind. Soon, the questions that had no answers began to spawn their own stories. Was it a curse, passed down from the old miners? Had they accidentally disturbed something ancient and evil buried beneath the stone? Or was it something else entirely? Something that had been waiting for them in the woods, a silent, unseen predator that simply didn't leave a trace. The whispers started in hushed tones, at kitchen tables and in general stores, giving form to a fear that was otherwise shapeless. But a fear that starts as a whisper often grows into a shout, and soon, the stories moved beyond speculation and into something far more tangible. The first accounts began to emerge from hunters and travelers who, out of necessity, had to pass by the quarry at night. They didn't just feel an eerie presence. They heard something, a sound, faint but unmistakable, that seemed to come from deep within the stone itself. And then came the first account that no one could easily dismiss. A hunter, a man known for his calm, collected demeanor, was making his way through the woods at dusk, not far from the quarry's edge. The woods had grown silent, the kind of stillness that precedes a storm. As he neared the chasm, he stopped, his blood running cold. From somewhere deep within the stone, he heard it. It wasn't a whisper. It was a faint, rhythmic, tink-tink-tink, a sound that was so familiar, so out of place, that it made the hair on his arms stand up. It was the muffled sound of a chisel striking rock. He stood frozen, listening. After a moment, he heard another sound, a soft, scraping noise, like a shovel being dragged across gravel. It was the sound of the men at work, the ghostly echo of their daily routine, playing out in the profound silence of the evening. He didn't stick around to investigate. He dropped his rifle and ran, a quiet terror gripping his soul. He later recounted his story, not with the wild-eyed fervor of a man who saw a ghost, but with the chilling certainty of a man who heard the impossible. Soon, others came forward with similar stories. The whispers weren't just a rumor, they were a sound, and they were very real. The town knew that the men were not just gone. They were still there, trapped. The accounts grew more frequent and more detailed. It wasn't just the rhythmic sounds of work anymore. People who were brave or foolish enough to approach the quarry claimed they could hear the faint, muffled sounds of human voices. Not clear words, but a cacophony of panicked whispers and the echo of a man crying for help. The sounds were trapped, it seemed, just as the men were. The quarry was not just a hole in the ground. It was a prison, a silent, unyielding tomb. And so, the community created a new truth for themselves, one that was both terrifying and strangely logical. The men hadn't simply vanished. They had been trapped. The rock, in some impossible supernatural way, had closed around them. Their final moments, their sounds of struggle, their terrified whispers, the clang of their tools as they tried to break free, had been absorbed by the very stone they were working on. The quarry itself had become a massive, silent recorder, a keeper of a horrifying secret. The legend of the echoes beneath the stone was born. It was a story of a crime that had no witnesses, a fate that had no escape, and a haunting that was so much more chilling than a simple ghost. The quarry had claimed its victims, but it had not forgotten them. The men of Deadman's quarry were not floating spirits. They were a part of the earth itself, their final moments echoing for eternity, waiting to be heard. But was this terrifying story simply a fever dream born of grief and imagination? Or was there a scientific explanation for the sounds? Every great legend eventually attracts a skeptic. As the story of Deadman's quarry was passed down through the generations, it began to be viewed through the lens of logic and science. Was it really the sound of trapped ghosts? Or was there a simpler, more rational explanation for the echoes beneath the stone? After all, the quarry itself was not just a hole in the ground. It was a unique geological formation, a man-made chasm carved into a specific type of limestone. Geologists and sound engineers who later studied the area were fascinated by its properties. The quarry's immense, flat rock walls and its deep, cavernous shape made it a perfect natural amphitheater. The stone itself, a dense limestone, is known for its ability to reflect and carry sound over great distances. So, what if the strange echoes weren't a supernatural event at all, but a predictable, though rare, acoustic phenomenon? The theory goes that the sound of the men working the clang of their tools, the distant shouts, the rumbling blast was trapped within the chasm. The sounds, instead of dissipating, bounced off the sheer walls and were absorbed into the micro-fissures of the stone. Over time, these sounds could be released under very specific conditions, perhaps with a change in temperature or air pressure, creating the illusion of a haunting. One of the most compelling scientific theories is the concept of acoustic memory. Imagine the quarry as a giant, geological tape recorder. The massive rock walls, carved by human hands, absorbed the sounds of the men's labor, the clang of their tools, the faint shouts, the rumble of rock. These sounds were trapped within the microscopic cracks and fissures of the stone. Later, under just the right atmospheric conditions, a drop in pressure, a change in wind direction, a sudden shift in temperature, the stone could play back these sounds, a ghostly echo of a day long past. This wasn't just a wild guess, it was based on documented phenomena. Scientists have recorded similar sound anomalies in canyons and caves around the world. The unique geometry of the quarry, with its deep chasm and flat walls, would amplify these subtle releases of sound. The low mournful moans that people reported could have been a wind tunnel effect, created by the wind being funneled through the quarry. Even the whispers of the men could have a logical explanation. A distant animal sound or a gust of wind could be distorted by the quarry's walls and echo in a way that our brains, primed by the legend, would interpret as a human voice. It's a testament to the power of our perception. What we expect to hear, we will often find. And so, the scientific explanation offers a tidy, elegant solution to the mystery. The sounds are not ghosts. They are simply the physics of a man-made chasm, the memory of labor echoing through stone. It makes perfect sense, doesn't it? It explains the echoes, the whispers, and the general feeling of being watched. But for many, this explanation simply isn't enough. A rational theory can explain the sound, but can it explain the palpable feeling of dread? Can it explain the stories of people who, having no prior knowledge of the legend, have reported hearing the same eerie sounds of work and whispers? The scientific approach strips the story of its emotional weight, of the chilling human terror that makes the legend so powerful. The sound may be a natural phenomenon, but the legend is a testament to something else. The human mind is desperate need to find a truth, even if that truth is terrifying. While science may have an answer for the sounds beneath the stone, it may never be able to explain the profound, unsettling feeling of a place where a history so terrible has been trapped forever. But what happens when we use modern-day technology, designed to prove the unprovable, to search for answers? The science may offer a rational explanation, but it can't quite capture the chilling power of the legend. So, In recent years, a new kind of explorer has started visiting Deadman's Quarry, the paranormal investigator. These aren't the skeptics with geological survey tools, but people armed with technology designed to bridge the gap between our world and whatever is left of the men who vanished. Their approach is methodical. They arrive at the quarry after dark, when the world is silent and the senses are heightened. They bring a suite of specialized gear, each piece a modern-day instrument for an ancient search. There's the EVP recorder, or electronic voice phenomena, which is essentially a sensitive microphone designed to capture sounds we can't hear. Then there are the EMF meters, which measure electromagnetic fields, the kind some believe are emitted by spirits. And finally, thermal cameras, which can detect unexplained cold spots, a common sign of paranormal activity. They aren't looking for a ghost in a white sheet, they're looking for data. They're trying to quantify a legend, to find a pattern in the chaos. And what they've found is far more compelling than any campfire story, but still not enough to solve the mystery. They found a place where the air itself felt heavy, where the readings on their equipment seemed to tell a story of their own. The sun has set, and the quarry is a black, gaping hole against the night sky. The team has set up their equipment, their breath visible in the cool air. The silence is profound, broken only by the occasional rustle of a nocturnal animal. Then, a small, high-pitched beep. The EMF meter, held over an area where the men's tools were found, spikes erratically, its lights flashing. There's nothing nearby to cause such a strong electromagnetic field, nothing at all. A few feet away, a thermal camera shows an anomaly, a distinct, cold spot. The air temperature is consistent everywhere else. But here, on the very ledge where the foreman Jedediah was said to have last stood, the temperature has dropped by 10 degrees. It's an invisible presence, a cold breath in the otherwise uniform night air. It's a chilling and undeniable piece of evidence that suggests something is here. But the most compelling moments came from their EVP recorder. After hours of silence, one of the investigators asked a simple question into the void. "Are you still here?" When they played back the recording later, a faint, almost imperceptible sound was heard in the background. It was too quiet to be understood, but it was there, a low guttural murmur that sounded nothing like the wind. It was a sign that something, some echo of the past, was indeed still lingering. That faint whisper was enough to send a jolt through the investigators. The team decided to focus their efforts on a single, crucial location, the exact spot where the men's tools were found. This was the epicenter of the initial vanishing, and it was here that they had to get their definitive proof, if any existed. They placed multiple EVP recorders and thermal cameras around the rock face, and one of them spoke into the darkness. A simple prompt. "Show us you're here." The reply, when it came, was not a whisper. It was a clear, unmistakable sound that came through the recorders at the same time. It was the distinct, metallic clang of a pickaxe striking stone. The sound was muffled, as if coming from a great distance or from behind a thick wall, but it was there, undeniable and terrifying. It was the sound of labor, a sound that had been made in this quarry for over 150 years. The investigators were shaken. Their science had no explanation for it. It wasn't the wind, it wasn't an echo. It was the chilling, unmistakable sound of a work that had been interrupted forever. This piece of evidence, captured on multiple devices, became the most compelling piece of the puzzle. It suggested that the legend of the echoes beneath the stone was not just a story, but a terrifying reality. The men of Deadman's Quarry may be gone, but their final moment is not. So, what is the final verdict on Deadman's Quarry? The history is frustratingly vague, with no official records to definitively prove a mass disappearance. The science offers a compelling, rational explanation that the very geology of the quarry acts as a natural recorder, echoing sounds from the past. And the paranormal evidence, while tantalizing, is still ultimately ambiguous, open to interpretation and skepticism. It's a case with no easy answers, a mystery that, like the men who vanished, has left more questions than a conclusion. But the real power of this story isn't in finding a definitive answer. It's in the unshakable feeling of dread that the legend creates. The idea of being trapped beneath a mountain of stone, of your final moments being recorded and played back for all eternity, is a far more terrifying thought than any simple ghost story. The legend is a testament to the idea that a place can hold on to a memory, a traumatic echo of the past, and never let it go, and the echoes remain. The stories continue. The quarry stands as a silent monument to a time when a community lost its men, and perhaps, the men lost their souls. Is it a place of history, a place of science, or a place of spirit? We may never know for sure, but the next time you hear a strange sound on the wind, a faint whisper in the dark, remember the men of Deadman's Quarry, and the terrifying possibility that sometimes, the past isn't just a memory, it's trapped, echoing, forever.